All right, so I've watched some atheist responses to, most recently, Randal Rauser was in a debate, Is Christianity Rational? I posted a video about it a couple days ago. And then I watched some atheists and secular people respond to that and talk about Reformed epistemology. There seems to be a lot of confusion about what Reformed epistemology actually is and actually is saying in the secular/atheist community. So let's try to clarify. It is not a special category. Okay, it's not special pleading for Christianity. Christianity is something that doesn't need to be evidenced. Why? Because we have the witness of the Holy Spirit. It's not what it's doing. What it is trying to do, legitimately and authentically, is account for an experience that people are legitimately reporting to have experienced. So there is something known in this world as a religious experience. And by extension, Planaga has talked about a sensus divinatis, a sense of the divine or a sense of the divine presence. I sense that God is present in this moment. Okay? That is not a special category of sensory experience. It is sensory experience that atheists and non-believers are not experiencing. It's not a special category of sensory experience. It is an experience that is being reported to by people just like you, that if you're a secular atheist person, you haven't experienced. Now, it is not rational to say, I have not experienced what that person claims to have experienced, therefore it cannot have occurred. That's not a rational idea. Nor is it rational to say, there are two possibilities. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that when a religious person has a religious experience, let's just say they're actually contacting an ontology. Now, those of us who are religious believe that we in fact are. Okay, you cannot just say, I don't believe that you are, therefore that's not a legitimate experience. You aren't having it, it doesn't count. That's what a lot of atheists are trying to do. Now, if you're thinking clear about it, okay, the only thing that someone can say, your first avenue, let's try and actually let me start from the beginning. The first avenue, it is completely and 100% rational to believe what you directly perceive. Your first avenue of experiencing what is true in the world is sensory observation. What you see, assuming that your senses are functioning properly, is what is actually occurring. That is the main argument of Alvin Plantinga. It doesn't require an argument to be proved to you that what you are directly perceiving with your senses is in fact occurring. Assuming that your senses are functioning properly, you are actually perceiving reality. It doesn't become automatically negated because there are some people somewhere who don't believe you. It doesn't work like that. So, let's say, I tried to explain this in the past, let's try and make this clear. If your senses perceive it, you are perfectly rationally justified in believing what your senses perceive to be so. If other people don't believe you because it doesn't comport with their worldview, that's fine. It's not necessarily something that translates to people outside of yourself, but you are perfectly rationally justified to believe what you directly perceive, however implausible it may seem. And you don't require arguments to prove it to yourself. That's all that he's trying to say, and that is common sense. That's not, some outlandish new category to make it easier to defend religious experiences. That is a way of categorizing a religious experience for what it in fact may be. That's an honest accounting of what is actually happening in a religious experience. The person who is experiencing the experience is potentially completely rationally justified in believing what his senses say is occurring. Full stop. So, to clarify the argument, let's say you are sitting on a park bench, and for whatever reason you can only sit there for 1 hour, and directly across from you is a parking lot, and in that parking lot is an elephant. however implausible it may seem to you that there is an elephant in the parking lot, assuming your senses are functioning properly, there's an elephant in the parking lot. The arguments are superfluous. Why? Because you might not know why there's an elephant in the parking lot. If you are sitting there on a park bench for an hour and you are observing an elephant in a parking lot for an hour, you got to assume that it's actually there. Why? Because you see it with your own eyes. That's the evidence. That's what is evidencing it to you. And there's not a single person listening to me. Put yourself in that position. You're sitting on a park bench. You see an elephant in a parking lot. You got a phone call from your wife, Craig, or whomever, secular person. Yes, dear? Is there an elephant in front of you? Yes, dear. Yes, I see an elephant. What's your evidence that the elephant is there? I see it with my own eyes. Now, what Randal Rauser is saying, unless you have a really strong defeater, you are perfectly rationally justified. It's also what Planet is saying. Unless you have a really strong defeater, you are perfectly rationally justified to believe what you directly perceive. It's not special pleading. It's just how the world actually operates. All of your beliefs come through your sensory apparatus. All of them. Empiricism is based on your sensory apparatus. When scientists are doing experiments, what are they doing? They're counting how many sheep are in the pen with their eyes. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sheep. They're doing an experiment on sheep. They're counting them. They're seeing them. They're listening to them. All of empiricism is based on sensory observation. Period, full stop. If your senses aren't functioning properly to the point where you can't trust what they directly say to you is in fact occurring, then you can't trust them at all. Now, where this gets confused is atheists will say some secular people say your senses aren't completely trustworthy. That is not true. They are trustworthy except at the margins. Yes, your senses can play tricks on you, but not about the basic foundations of what they are seeing. You don't see things in your apartment that aren't there. If you see something in your apartment, you got to assume that it's there, however implausible that may seem. So let's go back to our elephant. Now, if you see it for a second and then it disappears, you can assume that that was your mind playing tricks on you, your eyes playing tricks on you. Right? At the margins, your senses sometimes can't be trusted. You thought you heard God. That's a good one. I thought I could have sworn God was talking to me. Maybe you heard the voice of God, maybe you didn't. Why? It only happened for a second. When we're talking about religious experience, we aren't talking about marginal experiences. For example, I know 1,000 people right here in the LA area who are laying claim to a religious experience that they participate in every single solitary Sunday. Yes, they might not be directly perceiving God. I'm not arguing that because we believe it's God, it's therefore God. I am arguing that we are perfectly rationally justified in believing that what we go participate and it feels to us like God and seems to us like God, we are perfectly rationally justified to believe that there is some form of divine presence in that room. Now, what I'm also telling you, if I put you, the atheist, in that room on Sunday in my church, and you were instructed to worship along with everybody for 15 or 20 minutes, half of the people listening to me, those of you who are secular people, those who are atheists, I promise you this is true, half of you listening to me would get it immediately. You wouldn't necessarily become Christians. You wouldn't necessarily go, I could put Pine Creek Doug in there. And if he was instructed to stay put and participate in the worship service, he would get it immediately, and he'd stop being a lot more circumspect about how easily he dismisses this stuff. Why? Because it really does feel like God. It really does seem like God. It would seem like the presence of God to you too. You go, wait a minute, something's up with this. Now, I'm not saying you become a believer on the spot, but you get it immediately. You go, I get why people believe this is God. Why? Because it kind of seems like God. As soon as the worship music starts, 15, 20 people, or no, 200, 300 people start worshiping in unison. You sat there for 15, 20 minutes, you'd understand immediately why it's so powerfully convincing to us. Why? Because you get it. Trust me. You wouldn't necessarily walk away going, hallelujah, Jesus is risen. But you would walk away going, I understand why they think that's God. Why? Because it kind of sort of felt like God too. Now, there are ontological claims in the Bible. Ontological claims. Not claims that Jesus rose from the dead, not faith claims, not claims that Jonah lived in a whale. Ontological claims about the present tense, what we are to experience as believers. And guess what? Those claims match the reality of my experience 100 to 100. Exactly. Identical. And if you read those scriptures in that church, they would match your experience to a T. So, for example, the Bible says, in all things, through prayer and supplication, make your requests known, then let the peace of God rule on your heart. I've taken non-believers to that church service. My sister, for example, she had a powerful enough experience that she was moved to tears. The first thing most people tell me, feels very peaceful in this place. Well, that's the peace of God. That's an ontological claim about something you are going to directly experience in the here and now. There is a bunch of those in the Bible, and I'll go in them in those two videos to come. But getting back to our elephant in the parking lot. If you are sitting in a parking lot on a park bench and you see an elephant in front of you, it's 100% rationally justified for you to believe that there's an elephant there, no matter how implausible that seems, it's immaterial. Every single solitary person listening to me would think there's an elephant there. Now, my wife calls. I say, send me a picture, dear. She sends me and I'm going to tell you what's in the picture. She sends me a picture, and I go, that's my cat. And she goes, that's your cat. So I just checked that my eyes are working properly, and she confirmed that my eyes are working properly. Now I'm pretty certain it's an elephant. If I'm seeing it for an hour, your eyes can play tricks on you. They don't play tricks on you for an hour. That's what I'm saying. Your sensory apparatus can deceive you. It doesn't deceive you for 20 minutes of a church service. We are all participating in something that we honestly believe is an experience that is the divine presence or some form of presence of God. If you don't believe us, that's your prerogative. But I promise you, if I put you in that exact service, not a service you had 20 years ago, that's not the same thing. Why? Because there's some form of skill involved in making this experience strong enough so that it is vivid and real enough to the participants. And not every church rolls the same way. I tried to explain this in the past. I promise you this is true. Just like an actor prepares to act a performance, there's a methodology involved, how he accesses the emotions so that he's able to perform the task. Some of that methodology is scientifically verifiable. Some of it is pure intuition. But there is a way that he accesses his abilities to do that type of subjective task. Same idea in a religion. There is a skill involved. A skill involved. You go to some church services and some of those preachers just ain't hitting it. They aren't speaking to your emotions. They aren't moving people. The Spirit isn't really moving through that room in Christian ease. The Christian will say, wow, that preacher is really anointed. What do you mean? He has some form of mysterious talent wherein he is able to make this subjective internal religious experience not only real to him, but real to other people. That's what Billy Graham did. That's what he was good at doing. I put you in a Billy Graham sermon, there's a pretty good chance you're going to have a come to Jesus moment. Why? Because he has had a powerful subjective internal experience that's called a religious experience that's 100% real to him. Promise you it was real to him. That's why he was so committed. I promise you, some of us walking around in this world who are laying claim to religious experience, it's 100% real to us. We aren't faking it at all. Some of us are just better at translating in terms that make it real to other people. That requires skill, talent. The service I go to on Sunday, guys, pretty darn good. 15 people become Christians on the spot. Why? Because it really honestly feels like they experienced something that was God. Now, all Planija is trying to do is telling you, you do not need to argue. And this is obvious and this is common sense and there's no debating this. If you go to my church service and you say, it didn't feel like God to me, good, your prerogative. It's entirely possible that A, you cannot experience God if you're a secular person, or B, you do not want to experience God. Those are two possibilities that are eminently reasonable. It isn't just only possible that I'm wrong, I'm deluded, and so is everybody at my church. That's not the only possibility on the table. You get that, right? There is also the possibility that a secular person, an atheist, A, doesn't want to experience God, B, cannot have that divine experience. Why? Because they're just not tuned into it the same way. Can any of you act? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Can you sing? Some of you can, some of you cannot. It's entirely possible that there is a talent and a sensitivity involved in a religious experience. Matter of fact, I'd say it's 100% probable, more than likely, given the type of people who lay claim to them, that there's a certain type of skill set involved, and that's completely the different type of skill set than most of the thing that's most heavily valued in the atheist community. Wow, call me surprised. All they talk about in the atheist community, rational this, logical this, A equals A thinking. That's a perfectly legitimate way of thinking, but it's not the only type of thinking on the table. And they tend to undervalue intuitive thinking, emotional processings, things that would probably be a lot more common in people who lay claim to religious experiences. A lot more common. Now, your elephant. You're sitting on a park bench seeing an elephant. Somebody calls you up, and he's your A elephant friend. I'm your A elephant friend, Craig. Well, I don't believe you see an elephant. How are you going to logically convey that you're seeing an elephant? Is there an argument you can make about an elephant? No. You don't even know why it's there. If you see it with your own eyes, you're going to believe that it's there, period. And you're probably right. All things being equal, if your senses are functioning properly, there's probably an elephant there. You don't need to explain it through argumentation. Why? Your senses tell you directly that it's there. Now, you probably got a lot of friends who are going to believe you. Why? Because they trust you. You're more credible to some people than others. Right? So if I said I saw an elephant in a parking lot yesterday, some of my friends would go, sure you did, Craig. Can you sell me some of whatever you were smoking that day? Because I want some too. Sounds like good primo stuff. And some of your friends would go, I believe you, Craig. I love you. Some of my friends would say that. I swear to God, they would. I love you, Craig. I believe you. Cool. Give me your money, dude. Awesome. Sucker born every minute. Now, you might not know why the elephant is there. You might not have a good argument. This is all Planinger is trying to say. A sense of a divine presence cannot be discounted because you don't believe it. Doesn't work like that. You can't discount that your friend saw an elephant. Now, maybe if you guys explore the issue, let's say that I stay on the bench another 20 minutes and a truck pulls up and it says circus. And they go, wow, it's a good thing we had this parking space to keep this elephant, because the circus was closed down because of coronavirus, but now we can take him to Northern California. So now you have a really good explanation for why there's an elephant in the parking lot. So now you have an argument and your sensory experience. So now it's pretty much 100%. There was an elephant in the parking lot. But prior to that truck pulling up, you might not have any good idea why there's an elephant in the parking lot. So you don't have any arguments about it. There's no argument that you could possibly make. Why? Because you have no idea why it's there. All you know is you see it. And if your senses are functioning properly, it's probably there. Because that's what your senses are there for. To tell you what's what. And there's nobody's senses who is listening to me that are so untrustworthy that if you saw something for an hour, you wouldn't actually think it was there in real time occurring. Again, unless you're a drug addict, unless you're prone to hallucinations, unless you got some reason to actually doubt your senses, every single solitary one of you, if you were sitting in a chair and there was an elephant 100 yards away from you, and you saw it for long enough, and you confirm that your senses were working properly, you go, there's an elephant there. And you wouldn't need any argumentation to prove it to yourself. It's its own reality. It's there. I know it's there. Why? I see it. Now, it's not quite an even parallel with the religious experience. That's why I brought up going to my church. And my church is a perfect... The thing that the atheists will say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I'm not claiming that you're going to go to my church and know for a fact Jesus rose from the dead. I'm not even claiming anything all that extraordinary. I'm claiming something pretty ordinary that occurs in churches all over the country. I'm claiming that if I took you to my church and you were instructed to participate along with the worship service, you would get it immediately and you'd be a lot more circumspect. You'd get it immediately. You wouldn't walk away from there going, hallelujah, he is risen. But you would walk, even Pine Creek Doug, I swear to God, even Pine Creek Doug, he'd stop running playbooks on people. Why? Because he'd get it. He'd go, wait a minute, I do understand why they believe this. Why? Because it's convincing. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean that's actually God in that room with everybody. But if I put you in a service where it was really, really happening powerfully to the people there, and they were really, really subjectively describe themselves as really powerfully connected to the Holy Spirit, I promise you I've been to services like that, where everybody says, we were really on fire that night. And there's something tangibly different about the reality of that room that you would notice immediately. And you wouldn't get all freaked out and go, we didn't do weird things and walk on snakes or whatever. Nothing, anything outlandish. No weird, crazy moments where I don't even know what you sometimes see, people falling or whatever. None of that. But you'd see it with your own eyes and you would tangibly experience something that would be palpable and real to you. Now, you could define that any way you want to yourself. You could, like I said, I've taken my sister to that experience. She's had powerful enough to be moved to tears. She is not now, nor has she been in the last few years since that experience, any type of real believer. Maybe she marginally believes in God. But she would probably still describe herself as a non. She's not a Christian. How does she describe that experience to herself? I'm not sure. I've heard Steve McCrae recently talk about a religious experience he had way back when. The only thing I'm trying to point out is that Planet Joe is 100% correct. And he's not trying to argue for some special case for religious experiences. There's some special pleading here. The sensus divinatus is not some special category of sense experience. It is a sense experience that religious people are claiming they have, that atheists and secular people are claiming they have never had. But here's the really interesting part. A lot of the atheists and secular people have had those experiences too. And if you're an atheist and secular person, do this little check on yourself right now. Nobody's watching. Nobody's going to kick you out of the atheist club immediately. But ask yourself this one question, because almost every atheist I talk to has experiences like that. And they can look back on something and go, if I actually believed in God and if God actually did exist, that was God. Everybody I've ever known has an experience like that. That's why most people believe in God. Why? Because they've had experiences like that that were real to them. I don't necessarily believe in God. I had those when I was an agnostic. I don't necessarily believe in God, but if there is a God, that was God. Weird experience with my cousin. The whole fact that AA, when I first started recovery, that used to freak me out. That AA was all spiritual. It gave me fear of God. I can't believe this is all about God. And then when I got really freaked out about it, and I told my, at the time, girlfriend, I was like, yeah, it's all about spiritual stuff. I don't know, it's weird. They always talk about God, and I showed her the steps. She's like, these are really cool. And I was like, I don't know. At the time, it weirded me out. Anyways, if you are a secular person, atheist person right now, and you're thinking that sensus divinatus is some type of special category, it isn't. It's a common human experience. It's why most people believe in God. Why? Because they've had common experiences that they go, if there is a God, that was God. And if there is a God, that was God. And lo and behold, how interesting that they're less common in a more secular society. But if you put us back to 1885, they're happening all the time. Does that mean that they were ontologically connected to some spiritual being or some transcendent reality? Don't know. Don't know, but it certainly qualifies as evidence. Hello? It certainly does. Yeah, it does. The whole there's no evidence, that certainly qualifies as evidence. Yeah, it does. And if you go look at your own life, I'm pretty sure you've had 3 or 4 of those. I'm pretty sure you had 3 or 4 of them. Almost everybody I've ever talked to has had them. Almost everybody I've ever talked to has had them. You translate them, you describe them to yourself differently now if you're an atheist or secular person than you did then. But that doesn't mean you didn't have them. You just write them off now and rationalize them away. But you still had them. That's it. And I swear to God, I could very easily, any single solitary person listening to me, if you gave me some, this is what I was trying to do with Brett. Brett kind of disappeared, figured he would. Brett, if you ever come back, I figured he would. Why? Because most people are resistant. Most people are actually resistant. Even in my church where people are practicing Christians, they're really resistant. Really, really resistant to those experiences. Lo and behold, isn't that interesting? Promise. Promise that's true. Even at my church, where people think they're good Christians, they're really resistant. There's a lot of fight inside of people. A lot. Pine Creek Doug, if I put him in that, if I put you in that situation, Pine Creek Doug, I promise you, you would change your tune almost immediately. You'd still probably be a non-believer, but you'd have a lot more respect. You'd have be a lot more circumspect, a lot less sure of yourself, and you'd be a lot more respect for Christians. You'd get it a lot more. And you wouldn't automatically go, here, let me prove how fake you guys are. Let me prove how much garbage this actually is. Why? Because you wouldn't be that confident anymore. You'd be like, oh my God, there's something real happening here that they are actually experiencing. Now, here's the kicker. How would I ever get you in that room? Probably not. That's where the resistance shows itself. You find 1,000 different ways to never go to where you could actually experience it. Now, if you're an atheist listening to me, take really good heed of yourself, because that's something, inventory you could do on yourself. Be a little bit honest. Do you spend most of your days reinforcing your non-belief? Guess what? That ain't seeking God. God don't owe you no favors. I swear to God, he doesn't. He don't owe you no favors. I spend my days seeking, reinforcing my non-belief in you. But you show up and tell me that you exist. Doesn't work like that. You have to cultivate some type of inner witness. It's not something that just occurs. It's something you actively cultivate. Just like with acting. You don't just, downplay the methodology. Never try to downplay acting, disparage acting, to, talk about how stupid acting is, talk about how it's not a talent, talk about there's no way of ever becoming an actor, and then one day you say, here, play Death of a Salesman, and all of a sudden you're really good and know what to do. It doesn't work like that. Doesn't even come close. Why you would think otherwise, don't know. But it doesn't. So, anyways, there you have it, kids. That is all for now. Mass has ended. Go in peace. Amen.